Little Women, Chapter 4. Being Neighborly. "What in the world are you going to do now, Joe?" asked Meg, one snowy afternoon as her sister came tramping through the hall in rubber boots, old sack and hood, with a broom in one hand and a shovel in the other. "I can't keep still all day, and not being a pussy cat, I don't like to doze by the fire. I like adventures, and I'm going to find some." Meg went back to toast her feet and read, and Joe began to dig paths. The snow was light, and with her broom she soon swept a path all round the garden, for Beth to walk in when the sun came out and Beth's dolls needed air. The garden separated the Marches' house from that of Mr. Lawrence. Both stood in a suburb of the city, which was still country-like, with groves and lawns, large gardens, and quiet streets. A low hedge parted the two estates. On one side was an old brown house, looking rather bare and shabby, robbed of the vines that in summer covered its walls, and the flowers which then surrounded it. On the other side was a stone mansion, showing every sort of comfort and luxury. Yet it seemed a lonely, lifeless sort of house, for no children played on the lawn, no motherly face ever smiled at the windows, and few people went in and out, except the old gentleman and his grandson. To Joe this fine house seemed a kind of enchanted palace, full of delights which no one enjoyed. She had long wanted to see its hidden glories, and to know better the Lawrence boy. Since the party she had been more eager than ever, and had planned many ways of making friends with him. But he had not been seen lately, and Joe began to think he had gone away, when she one day spied a brown face at an upper window, looking sadly down into her garden, where Beth and Amy were snowballing each other. "That boy needs friends and fun," she said to herself. "His grandpa does not know it's good for him, and keeps him shut up all alone. He needs somebody to play with. I've a mind to go over and tell the old gentleman so." The plan of "going over" was not forgotten, and when the snowy afternoon came, Joe decided to try what could be done. She saw Mr. Lawrence drive off, and then went out to dig her way down to the hedge, where she paused and looked over. All quiet, curtains down at the lower windows, servants out of sight, and nothing human visible but a curly black head leaning on a thin hand at the upper window. "There he is," thought Joe. "Ah, poor boy, all alone and sick this dismal day. I'll toss a snowball and make him look out, and then say a kind word to him." Up went a handful of snow, and the head turned at once. Joe laughed and waved her broom as she called out, "How do you do? Are you sick?" Laurie opened the window and croaked out, "Better, thank you. I've had a bad cold and been shut up a week." "I'm sorry. What do you amuse yourself with?" "Nothing. It's as dull as tombs up here." "Don't you read?" "Not much. They won't let me." "Can't somebody read to you?" "Grandpa does, sometimes, but my books don't interest him, and I hate to ask Brooke all the time." "Have someone come and see you, then." "There isn't anyone I'd like to see. Boys make such a noise, and my head is weak." "Isn't there some nice girl who'd read and amuse you? Girls are quiet, and like to play nurse." "Don't know any." "You know us," said Joe. "So I do. Will you come, please?" cried Laurie. "I'm not quiet and nice, but I'll come, if mother will let me. I'll go ask her. Shut that window like a good boy, and wait till I come." With that, Joe shouldered her broom and marched into her house. A few minutes later, Laurie heard someone being shown to the door of his little parlor. Joe appeared looking rosy and kind, with a covered dish in one hand and Beth's 3 kittens in the other. "Here I am, bag and baggage," she said. "Mother sent her love, and was glad if I could do anything for you. Meg wanted me to bring some of her sweet pudding, and Beth thought her cats would be comforting." It so happened that Beth's loan was just the thing, for in laughing over the cats, Laurie forgot his bashfulness and grew sociable at once. "How kind you are! Now, please, take the big chair, and let me do something to amuse you," said Laurie. "No, I came to amuse you. Shall I read aloud?" And Joe looked towards some books nearby. "Thank you. I've read all those, and if you don't mind, I'd rather talk," answered Laurie. "I'll talk all day if you'll set me going. Beth says I never know when to stop." "Is Beth the rosy one who stays at home a good deal and sometimes goes out with a little basket?" asked Laurie. "Yes, that's Beth. The pretty one is Meg, and the curly-haired one is Amy, I believe." "How did you find that out?" Laurie answered. "Why, you see, I often hear you calling to one another, and when I'm alone up here, I can't help looking over at your house. You always seem to be having such good times. I beg your pardon for being so rude, but sometimes you forget to put down the curtain at the window, and when the lamps are lighted, it's like looking at a picture to see the fire and you all round the table with your mother. It looks so sweet. I can't help watching. I haven't got any mother, you know." "You may look as much as you like," said Joe. "I just wish, though, instead of peeping, you'd come over and see us. Mother is so splendid. She'd do you heaps of good. And Beth would sing to you if I begged her. And Amy would dance. Meg and I would make you laugh over our funny plays. And we'd have jolly times. Wouldn't your grandpa let you?" "I think he would, if your mother asked him. He's very kind, though he does not look so, and he lets me do what I like, pretty much. Only he's afraid I might be a bother to strangers," said Laurie. "We are not strangers. We are neighbors, and you needn't think you'd be a bother. We want to know you, and I've been trying to do so such a long time. We haven't been here a great while, you know, but we have got acquainted with all our neighbors but you. You see, Grandpa lives among his books, and doesn't mind much what happens outside. Mr. Brooke, my tutor, doesn't stay here, you know, and I have no one to go about with me, so I just stay at home." "That's bad. You ought to make an effort, and go visiting everywhere you are asked. Then you'll have plenty of friends, and pleasant places to go." Joe then told him about her work with Aunt March, and gave him a lively description of the fidgety old lady, her fat poodle, the parrot that talked Spanish, and the library she loved. She went on and told all about her sisters and herself, of their plays and plans, their hopes and fears for father, and the most interesting events of the little world in which the sisters lived. Then they got to talking about books, and to Joe's delight, she found that Laurie loved them as well as she did, and had read even more than herself. "If you like them so much, come down and see ours. Grandpa is out, so you needn't be afraid," said Laurie. "I'm not afraid of anything," returned Joe. "I don't believe you are," exclaimed the boy. Laurie led the way from room to room, letting Joe stop to examine whatever struck her fancy. And so at last they came to the library, where she clapped her hands and pranced. It was lined with books, and there were pictures and statues, and little cabinets full of coins and curiosities, and chairs and strange tables, and best of all, a great open fireplace. "What richness!" sighed Joe, sinking into a chair and gazing about her. "Theodore Lawrence, you ought to be the happiest boy in the world." "A fellow can't live on books," said Laurie. Before he could say more, a bell rang, and Joe exclaimed, "Mercy me, it's your grandpa." "Well, what if it is? You are not afraid of anything, you know," returned the boy. "I think I am a little bit afraid of him, but I don't know why I should be. Marmee said I might come, and I don't think you're any worse for it," said Joe. A maid came in and said, "The doctor to see you, sir." "Would you mind if I left you for a minute?" said Laurie to Joe. "Don't mind me. I'm as happy as a cricket here," answered Joe. Laurie went away, and his guest amused herself in her own way. She was standing before a fine portrait of the old gentleman when the door opened again, and without turning, she said, "I'm sure now that I shouldn't be afraid of him, for he's got kind eyes, though his mouth is grim, and he looks as if he had a tremendous will of his own. He isn't as handsome as my grandfather, but I like him." "Thank you, ma'am," said a gruff voice behind her, and there, to her great dismay, stood old Mr. Lawrence. Poor Joe blushed. But then, as she looked at the living eyes under the bushy gray eyebrows, she saw they were kinder even than the painted ones. The old gentleman said, "So, you're not afraid of me, eh?" "Not much, sir." "And you don't think me as handsome as your grandfather?" "Not quite, sir." "And I've got a tremendous will, have I?" "I only said I thought so." "But you like me in spite of it?" "Yes, I do, sir." That answer pleased the old gentleman. He gave a short laugh and shook hands with her, and putting his fingers under his chin, he said, "You've got your grandfather's spirit, if you haven't his face. He was a fine man, my dear, but, what is better, he was a brave and honest one, and I was proud to be his friend." "Thank you, sir." "What have you been doing to this boy of mine, eh?" was the next question. "Only trying to be neighborly, sir." And Joe told how her visit came about. "You think he needs cheering up a bit, do you?" "Yes, sir. He seems a little lonely, and young folks would do him good, perhaps. We are only girls, but we should be glad to help if we could." "For we don't forget the splendid Christmas present you sent us," said Joe. "Tut, tut, tut. That was the boys' affair. Oh, there's the tea bell. Come down and go on being neighborly." At tea, the old gentleman saw how his grandson and Joe chatted away like old friends. There was color, light, and life in the boy's face now. "She's right. The lad is lonely. I'll see what these little girls can do for him," thought Mr. Lawrence. He liked Joe, for she seemed to understand the boy almost as well as if she had been one herself. After old Mr. Lawrence had come by to visit, said something funny or kind to each one of the girls, and talked over old times with her mother, nobody felt much afraid of him, except timid Beth. Then the new friendship flourished like grass in spring. Everyone liked Laurie, and he informed Brooke, his tutor, that the Marches were regular splendid girls. They took the lonely boy into their midst and made much of him, and he found something very charming in the companionship of these girls. What good times they had! Such plays and sleigh rides and skating parties, such pleasant evenings in the old parlor, and now and then such fine little parties at the great house. Meg could walk in the conservatory whenever she liked. Joe browsed over the new library, and Amy copied pictures and enjoyed beauty to her heart's content. But Beth, though yearning to play the grand piano, could not pluck up the courage to go to the mansion of bliss, as Meg called it. She went once with Joe, but the old gentleman's voice frightened her away, and she declared she would never go there any more. Nothing could change her mind, till Mr. Lawrence, hearing of her fear, set about mending matters. During one of the brief calls he made on the Marches, he led the conversation to music and talked away, fascinating Beth. At the back of his chair she stood listening, with her great eyes wide open and her cheeks red. Mr. Lawrence talked on about Laurie's lessons and teachers, and then, as if the idea had just occurred to him, he said to Mrs. March, "The boy neglects his music now, and the piano suffers for want of use. Wouldn't some of your girls like to run over and practice on it now and then, just to keep it in tune, you know, ma'am? They needn't see or speak to anyone, but run in at any time, for I'm shut up in my study at the other end of the house. Laurie is out a great deal, and the servants are never near the drawing-room after 9 o'clock. Please tell the young ladies what I say, and if they don't care to come, well, then why, never mind." Here he rose, as if going, and Beth made up her mind to speak. "Oh, sir, they do care, very, very much." She slipped her hand into his and looked up at him with gratitude. "Are you the musical girl?" he asked. "I love it dearly, and I'll come if you are quite sure nobody will hear me and be disturbed," she said. "Not a soul, my dear. The house is empty half the day, so come and drum away as much as you like, and I shall be obliged to you." "How kind you are, sir." Beth blushed, but she was not frightened now, and gave the big hand a grateful squeeze, because she had no words to thank him for the gift he had given her. The old gentleman, stooping down, kissed her, saying, I had a little granddaughter once, with eyes like yours. God bless you, my dear." And he went away in a great hurry. The next day, having watched both the old and the young gentleman leave their house, Beth, after 2 or 3 retreats, sneaked in at the side door and made her way to the drawing-room where the piano stood. With trembling fingers and frequent stops to listen and look about, Beth at last touched the great instrument, and right away forgot her fear. The delight with which the music gave her was like the voice of a beloved friend. After that, she slipped through the hedge nearly every day, and the great drawing-room was haunted by a musical spirit that came and went unseen. She never knew that Mr. Lawrence often opened his study door to hear the old songs he liked. She enjoyed herself heartily, and found that her granted wish was all that she had hoped for. Mother said one day, "I'm going to make Mr. Lawrence a pair of slippers. He is so kind to me. I must thank him, and I don't know any other way. Can I do it?" "Yes, dear, it will please him very much, and be a nice way of thanking him." Beth was a nimble little needlewoman, and the slippers were finished soon. Then she wrote a very short, simple note, and with Laurie's help got them left on his study table one morning before the old gentleman was up. All that day passed, and a part of the next, before any answer arrived, and she was beginning to fear she had offended her friend. On the afternoon of the second day she went out to do an errand. As she came up the street on her return, she saw 4 heads popping in and out of the parlor windows, and the moment they saw her, several joyous voices screamed, "Here's a letter from the old gentleman! Come quick and read it!" Beth hurried on in a flutter. At the door her sisters seized and bore her to the parlor, all pointing and all saying at once, "Look there! Look there!" There stood a little upright piano, with a letter lying on the glossy lid directed to Miss Elizabeth March. "For me?" gasped Beth. "Yes, all for you, my precious," said Joe. "Don't you think he's the dearest old man in the world?" The letter read, "Miss March, I have had many pairs of slippers in my life, but I never had any that suited me so well as yours. I like to pay my debts, so I know you will allow the old gentleman to send you something which once belonged to the little granddaughter he lost. With thanks and best wishes, I am your grateful friend and humble servant, James Lawrence." "Laurie told me how fond Mr. Lawrence used to be of the child who died, and how he kept all her little things carefully," said Joe. "Try it, honey. Let's hear the sound of that baby piano," said Hannah. So Beth tried it, and everyone said it was the most remarkable piano ever heard. "You'll have to go and thank him," said Joe, by way of a joke, for the idea of the child's really going never entered her head. "Yes, I mean to. I guess I'll go now, before I get frightened thinking about it." And to the amazement of the family, Beth walked down the garden, through the hedge, and in at the Lawrences' door. She went and knocked at the study door, when a gruff voice called out, "Come in." She did go in, right up to Mr. Lawrence, and held out her hand, saying, "I came to thank you, sir, for—" But she didn't finish, for he looked so friendly that she forgot her speech, and only remembering that he had lost the little granddaughter he loved, she put both arms around his neck and kissed him. Oh, that part almost makes me cry. I can just picture it, how sad he is. He lost his granddaughter, and now this wonderful little girl is kind of, not taking her place, but kind of. So back up to the beginning. There's the first page. I don't think we had anything till the second page. "The boy needs fun," Jo said to herself. So here we are. Let's see. I need to copy and paste. So this is Jo talking to herself. So we will go over to Jo's slide and put this on her interior monologue. I added Laurie right here. I don't know if I remember if I told you that yesterday or not. just so that we can remember who she was talking about or thinking about. And paste. And this one's obvious that she's thinking it to herself because it says, Jo said to herself. So that's kind of nice. A lot of books don't say something like that to make it obvious of what, that thing keeps getting in my way. I'll go back to the other slide. Let's see if I can grab it slowly. Over here. There we go. Got to move some things around here so I can reach it a little bit more carefully. There we go. Okay, so back to Little Women. Now the next. I came to amuse you, said Jo. This, whenever they use amuse, it always, I find that interesting. Remembering again that with no TV or movie theaters or all of the things that we do to amuse ourselves, they had to do things so differently. So they put on plays and they read books and they had these ways of calling on people. They would visit people. So they would go to friends' houses and they would leave a calling card. So if nobody was home, they would leave this little card on the door so that when the people got home, they'd go, oh, somebody came to visit us. And so they could see that that's how they knew that they were there. So lots of ways to amuse themselves that we didn't, that we don't think about today so much. I came to amuse you. We don't even think about that. How will I amuse myself today? So this is Jo's dialogue. I came to amuse you, said Jo. Now we have a description of Grandpa. Grandpa lives among his books. Grandpa lived among his books. So let's go down to Mr. Lawrence. Be careful not to go on to Lori. Mr. Lawrence. So I will be right after the colon on description, enter on the keyboard, drop the font down to 10, and paste. Grandpa lives among his books. Mr. Brooke is his tutor, and he will become a more major character later in the story. So this is like his teacher. They're so rich that the teacher comes to his house. One teacher just comes to his house and teaches him. So let's go find Mr. Brooke. It says John Brooke instead of Mr. Brooke. And we'll put this under description and drop the font down to 10. There we go. Mr. Brooke, my tutor, doesn't stay here. So he is a tutor, a teacher. And we have more of a description for Aunt March, a fidgety old lady. And then we find out some more of what she has. She has a fat poodle, a parrot that speaks Spanish, and loves her library. Loves her library. So we will go to Aunt March, which I think is after Marmee. Where did I put Aunt March? There she is. Yep, right after Marmee. And we'll add this to her description. Click here and get your cursor right after the last one. Enter on the keyboard and paste. Just a little bit more about her life. I'm as happy as a cricket here. I thought that was a cute saying. Happy as a cricket. Are crickets happy? How do we know crickets are happy? I don't know. Are they the ones that sing? Do crickets sing? Or is that a grasshopper? I can't remember. I'm as happy as a cricket, answered Jo. Let's go back to Jo's page. I know you guys, somebody's probably sure dying to tell me about crickets and grasshoppers. I'm as happy as a cricket. Enter and paste. Thank you, ma'am, said a gruff voice. Who is that gruff voice? That is Mr. Lawrence. Back down to Mr. Lawrence. There we go. Here's our dialogue. Enter. And we'll drop the font to 10 and paste. Gruff. Just because he's older, probably. He has living eyes under bushy gray eyebrows. So we'll add this to our description of Mr. Lawrence. This means that the eyes, sometimes when you look at people, you can see their eyes are just dancing. You could just see their personality in their eyes. And think about the difference between when you see someone who is maybe sick or sad, and you look at somebody who's healthy and well, the look in their eyes is very different. And that's a lot of times when you can tell somebody is sick, because you can see it in their eyes. It's kind of in their whole face. So the eyes are very telling. Eyes are very telling. Come down and go on being neighborly, said Mr. Lawrence. Another interesting way of using their words. Come down, they're going to tea. So every afternoon they would have tea. It's tea time. And he has enjoyed Jo's company, so he wants her to stay and join them for tea, for the afternoon tea. And by saying, and go on being neighborly, that means it's okay for her to stay. It's okay for her to join them while they have their tea. It's also okay for her to talk. Remember, we talked about this at some point with something else. I can't remember quite off the top of my head, but about children didn't speak unless spoken to, that kind of rule, kind of an old-fashioned rule. So by Mr. Lawrence saying you can go on being neighborly, it means join us for tea, and it's okay for you to talk. You don't have to sit there prim and proper and, just drink your tea and eat the little crumpet or cake or cookie or whatever it is. It's okay for you to be involved in the conversation. Which was, quite a privilege, especially for, a young girl. She's right. The lad is lonely, thought Mr. Lawrence. So this is an interior monologue for him. And he's acknowledging what Jo said to him about poor Laurie not having any friends and being lonely. And this is important because this gives Laurie the okay to go out and become friends with the four girls, the four sisters. The lad is lonely. And he does need that permission. He could not just go out. I know nowadays it's like, hey, somebody new moved in. We got new neighbors in the house a couple doors down. There's a kid outside playing. I'm going to go say hi. And then you guys just go all running out your front door. Well, maybe not right now because of COVID, but in a normal world in your little neighborhood, you'd be all running outside and everybody outside playing in the street. Hey, there's a new kid. They moved in. Da, da, da. You could not do that like this back then. It was not proper. So Laurie, even though being 15 or 16, he could not just go outside of his home and start talking to these girls without permission, not only from his grandfather, but from the girls' parents as well. He would be seen as being very forward if he did that. It would be improper, but they might also think that he was coming to call on them, which means he might have a love interest. Like maybe he wants to date one of the sisters. So everything needs to be discussed beforehand, and then they can become friends. And just be friends like you are friends at school. When you come to school, there's boys and girls, and you guys are all playing and talking and doing stuff, and it doesn't even matter. And so now this conversation is being established so that Laurie can be friends with the four sisters like that without any worry of wondering, is he trying to date me, or anything like that. They don't have to worry about that. Okay, so the Marches were regular, splendid girls. And this is a description of the girls. So let's go back up to Meg and see if we have room on Meg's slide with a description. Yeah, let's go ahead and put it here on Meg's page. Come on. There it goes. Marches were regular, splendid girls. And this is what Lori told, hang on a second, I should put this in a different place. Because this is what Lori told Brooke, which is his teacher, his tutor, Mr. Brooke. The marches are regular, splendid girls. So this is what Lori thinks of them. Oh, I got to go back and change it. Hang on. I'm going to move that. Okay, so I am going to highlight it here and backspace, delete it. And I'm going to move it over here. This is a much better place. Sorry about that. Some of you might have already, those of you who were trying to do it ahead of me, I bet you might have already put it there. How society sees them. This is how Lori sees the girls. Oh yes, much better spot. The marches were regular, splendid girls. Oops. I love it dearly, and I'll come if you are quite sure nobody will hear me and be disturbed. This, of course, is Beth talking to old Mr. Lawrence about the piano. So now we get to add some more dialogue to Beth. And she's talking about music when she says it. I love it dearly. She loves music, especially playing the piano, which is the only instrument they had. Now in action for her. She slipped through the hedge. So there's a, you've probably seen a hedge before. It's just bushes that all grow together, so it makes like a fence. And there's one of these hedges that's in between their homes. So she just, she cuts through the little hedge and goes to the house. And then she sneaks in. So we're going to put this under actions because this is all stuff that she does. She sneaks in and plays the piano. Oops, I think I went too small. Let me fix that. Take it up to 10. There we go. So it sounds like the place is haunted by a musical spirit, but it's really Beth. Beth was a nimble needlewoman. That means she was a very good seamstress. She was very good with the needle and thread. So again, they didn't have, well, Mr. Lawrence could go to a shoe store perhaps, but the Marches were certainly not going to a shoe store. Anything that they had, they most certainly made themselves. So more on the description of Beth. While she was musical, she was also a nimble needlewoman, which means she was a good seamstress. She could sew very, very well, which was an important skill to have at the time. I loved how he ended his letter, and we're going to be writing our letter today, writing a letter today. So instead of just saying from or your friend or sincerely, he says, your grateful friend and humble servant, James Lawrence. Your grateful friend and humble servant. So let's see, let me think about where we want to put this. This is something that Mr. Lawrence said, and he's describing himself, but it's how he feels about Beth. I am not sure about this one. We could put this on Beth. Grateful for how he sees. Oh, no. I think we're going to need to go down to Mr. Lawrence. He's describing himself. Let's put this under his description. That was a tricky one. But I just loved the way he ended that letter. It just shows you that you can be creative in how you close a letter. It doesn't have to just be from or sincerely. Your grateful friend and humble servant, James Lawrence. Very formal, but also very friendly. Beth walked down the garden, through the hedge, and in the Lawrence's door. More action. This is what she's doing. This is what she's doing. Back up to Beth. This is our last one. We will put this under actions. Something that she's, come on. There it goes. Beth walked down the garden, through the hedge, and in at the Lawrence's door. And then, of course, she just marched right up into his study and started to thank him for the piano. She was just so grateful for a beautiful piano, which would have been extremely expensive back in those days, and they could have never afforded it. And she just was beyond words how grateful she was.